Reason number one, a lot of the storylines were very overblown and broke the previous continuity of Star Wars. What do I mean by this? For a while, after Obi-Wan had mentioned the Clone Wars, there were so many inaccurate depictions of the Clone Wars, and when the actual Clone Wars movie had come out and the storylines about the Clone Wars that George Lucas created, people were upset that it wasn't depicted in the films as it was depicted in the early books when characters would talk about who fought in the Clone Wars, how did the Clone Wars go, and a lot of the storylines would not match up and they would break a lot due to the overblown saturation of storylines that had happened after Return of the Jedi. And another thing that the overblown storylines had caused was Darth Vader's continuity. Until we got to Revenge of the Sith, where we learned what happened to Darth Vader, how he ended up in the Iron Lung, all the storylines previous had many contradicting factors of how he got put into the suit. Even when I'm pretty sure the characters could have found out how he got put into the suit, no. One of the most ridiculous things is that in one of the character depictions, or I forgot which character told the story of what happened to Darth Vader. I think it was Obi-Wan in one of the books I had read from the EU, that Obi-Wan's ghost stated that I picked Darth Vader up and I threw him into the volcano, but he survived due to a force bubble protecting him. Nowhere was it mentioned that Vader's limbs were cut off, and yes, I can understand he got burned, but no way, not even with the Force, can protect you from molten lava. If that was so, Vader could have prevented himself from getting burned in Revenge of the Sith and still kept his limbs, not his limbs, but his skin and hair, and not get severely burned. But you see, this is what happens when the storylines got so overblown and oversaturated back to back to back that it would break certain continuities in the timeline. It was very timeline breaking. So that's the first reason why the EU could not work as current Star Wars films. It was very lore breaking. It broke continuity and storylines. It broke certain character aspects, and it just would break the timeline. The only thing that made sense in the timeline was probably the first trilogy, the Heir to the Empire trilogy. Other than that, every story that had happened afterwards contradicted the films of Star Wars. Okay? Even contradicting the original trilogy in many aspects, and contradicted the prequels before the prequels telling the story of Darth Vader had happened. So that is reason number one. Let's jump right into reason number two, which this reason actually makes even more sense on why these could not work. Reason number two, not everything that was done in the books that took place after Return of the Jedi could work on film. The Heir to the Empire trilogy alone, probably one film, one book, would have to be 2 parts, because the storylines were very long, and even if you was to compress it into a trilogy, people would still bitch and would still complain if certain aspects had to be left out, because that's what happens with book to film translations. Certain things have to get left out for narrative's sake, and a lot of people this generation don't know the Heir to the Empire trilogy unless their parents or people from the early times of when these EU books were created would show them. But why show them something old when they can have their own stuff to enjoy now? Okay? The reason why Disney needed to wipe the EU was because, yes, there was a lot of creative restrictions in creating new stories because of the EU. Though people think the EU is very good, and in ways, yes, it is good, but it was very restrictive to a certain narrative. Now that there is freedom to tell new stories, no, people are not happy with new stories. They just want the same stories over and over that they have read. Okay? That's not how it works. Okay? If you want to read the EU, that's fine. read it. Read Heir to the Empire. At least you still have it. But I've seen people make weak arguments saying, oh, this is how the characters should look 30 years later. Those were illustrations showing obviously illustrations are going to show the characters look younger than what they are. That would not work realistically in the real world. Certain things that happen in the books could not happen, period, now, due to the ages of the real actors. And even if Heir to the Empire was still being made, people would still be complaining. What if Carrie Fisher had died during an important thing that was supposed to happen for her during the EU's storylines that they wanted to put into the film? It couldn't be done because she would have passed away. So you will still have people crying and complaining that certain things that they wanted to see could not have been done. Even certain characters would have had to have been changed to fit the narrative of the film. But no, people want it done 100%, but that's unrealistic. There is nothing that can be done 100% to accuracy. And yes, people are going to say, oh, what about comic book films? You take a huge risk doing that. 300, Watchmen, and a couple of others got away with that on sheer luck alone. Okay? And the fan base was very high for it. Trying to do something that was 100% to the EU could not have worked. Not everyone knows it. Not every generation of Star Wars fans will know it except for the first generation. Okay? And the first generation at this point is what's wrong with Star Wars, because just because they're not getting what they want to be selfish and greedy, obviously they're going to complain about it and look for reasons to complain. Like I said, not everything that was done in those books, not even certain things that happened in the original Clone Wars, could have worked. Okay? There was many things wrong. Okay? The EU trilogies and the EU books are not the holy grail that people make it out to be. There's a lot of broken aspects, a lot of convolutions, and plenty of plot holes. Okay? And even the films could not have fixed that. So let's move on to reason number 3. Reason number 3. A lot of the plot holes and convolutions caught through this EU, created by a lot of the storylines, have created lore-breaking aspects. Lore in Star Wars is very important. The only lore that was very consistent was the Old Republic storylines. Anything that went past Old Republic broke the lore, especially in the EU. The EU brought in things and actually did things that made the films, the original trilogy, very redundant. Like, the dumbest thing the EU did was bringing back the Emperor several times through clones. That kind of made the most powerful and impacting ending in all of the series seem very redundant and ridiculous. And having Luke turn to the dark side, that broke his character right there. Luke would never have done that. He didn't do it under pressure. He didn't do it while he was getting electrocuted, and he didn't do it against his father. Why is it okay for it to happen in the EU? But I bet if it was to happen in the films, everybody complaining now would have complained about it back then. The EU broke a lot of the lore established for the characters. Having Luke turn to the dark side, having Han and Chewbacca do certain things, having Chewbacca die in the most stupidest way possible. I mean, come on. You guys don't find any issues with that? Any person with sense would tell you there's a lot of problems and a lot of moments that broke the lore in Star Wars. And if you go back and read those books today, you'll find a lot of the plot points and a lot of the setups don't have a lot of payoff. Okay? They have a lot of build-up, but little payoff. Versus the films where they build up gradually, not right off the bat, but they slowly build up. They have a lot of payoff. Okay? And a lot of unpredictability. Something that the old EU never had due to its lore-breaking narrations and narrative. On to number 4. Reason number 4. This generation of Star Wars fans is not made for the EU, or the EU is not made for this generation of Star Wars fans. A lot of the new generation getting into it is, say, the children of the previous generation, or even their children's children, like grandkids. The EU, they would not be able to understand that because the EU had so much going on within it that fans trying to get into it now would feel lost. If the EU was never wiped clean and they still made movies, they were trying to make movies, what if they wanted to make 3 completely different movies from the EU? It would destroy a lot of expectations for those films because a lot of people would expect the EU to be in the films, and the films can't do nothing new because they have to be restricted to the EU. Where now the films are unrestricted, the storylines are unrestricted, the universe can now be further fleshed out and take to every demographic of fans, be available to everyone, understand it to anyone of any age. Okay, a lot of the EU storylines went from just a simple like teenage kid films to adult based storylines, and a lot of that will not work. A lot of young fans will not be able to understand and pick up on this. But the old EU fans want this, and they only want it for themselves. You can't have it both ways. You can't be selfish and have your cakes and eat it too. It's just not going to work like that. Alright? And no matter what, Star Wars curiosity will kick in, and everyone will be curious of these new storylines. But at least these storylines have a constant flow of narration, and everyone can understand it. Unlike the EU, where, I'm sorry, the EU is not made for everyone of this generation, and that just needs to be accepted. Anyway, let's move into the 5th and final reason, and this one will be a big old doozy. The 5th and final reason is that when you think about it, the Star Wars EU was glorified, overly glorified fan fiction, because George Lucas, though he gave his blessings for people to expand the universe, he himself never made it canon, and they were never official. He even said they were never official to his universe. What was consistent was what he said was consistent. So this was long before Disney, but a lot of people did complain about that back in the day because a lot of people were against George Lucas. But now you're against Disney for trying to do something new. Okay? At the end of the day, everybody is picky and choosy and are very hypocritical about what they want and don't want. Okay? How do you know what's better for the Star Wars movies? Not everything you think would work could work, both logically and for screenplay purposes and for being on film. Alright? So that right there should be the reason why everyone needs to get off this bandwagon of hate. George Lucas from the very beginning never canonized the EU, and he had good reasons for it, okay? Though he allowed creators to give their own stories, unless he said they were canon, they were just over-glorified fan fiction tales, fan fiction storylines, and they actually do fit the title well of legends. They were just legends to begin with. They were nothing. If at the time of the EU was created, unless they were on the big screen at the time or on the big screen before Disney took over, they were never canon. Okay? They never existed to begin with. So if you still think that the EU is canon in some strange way, or no matter what happens, that you rely on the EU for your Star Wars information, then you're just very ignorant and not happy that the fan base still exists and that the series is continuing. Whether you like it or not, you can be a part of it, because Star Wars is great. No matter what people say, it's great. In this age of films, and a lot of the Last Jedi complaints are being broken and have been broken even by the director. The director has done videos and tweets stating all the complaints about the film people have had are easily broken. So that's all the 5 reasons of why the Star Wars EU could not work for films and could not work for this generation. So the comment section is open. Let the rage begin from everyone that I know is going to go buck fucking wild about this. So, until next time, guys, this is John with John Kill 3D Gaming, and I'm out, and I hope you guys have a good fucking night.